Okay, everybody, now we get to talk about Eli the computer guy's favorite word. Say it with me together, boys and girls. Architecture. So let's talk about the different architectural components you're going to have when you build a web application using Bottle. Again, all of these are relatively simple, but you do have to understand how the tech stack works in order to actually be able to build something that you're going to deploy somewhere. So the first part of the architecture is going to be Python, right? So Python is the back-end programming language that we've learned, and basically this is what we're going to use in order to process data and interact with things. We want to interact with the operating system, if we want to communicate with REST APIs, if we want to parse data, right, values that are coming in and do something with it, that is what we are going to be using Python for. Then you have the Bottle framework. Basically, the Bottle framework extends the capabilities of Python to give you the functionality for being able to have a web server, so basically a web server to present websites or web applications to visitors, a routing component, so when you go to the about page or the home page or that type of thing, Python knows what's supposed to happen there. It allows you again to process when values come in through a post or through a GET. They're able to deal with that kind of thing, and so basically Bottle gives you that web app functionality. Then you have templates that are part of Bottle. So what templates are is they're basically template files, kind of what they sound like, and what happens is with Bottle and Python, you send values to the templates, and then the templates are able to dynamically build web pages. So you have a template of a web page of whatever you want. Basically maybe it says like hello username, it gives you some information, that type of deal. Basically, the username and then additional information is sent to the templates from Bottle and Python. The templates then take that using something called a template language to dynamically format a web page that is going to be sent to the end user. You then have static files. So an important thing to understand with Bottle is that this is not like Apache or Nginx. So Apache, Nginx, IIS, those types of things, those are standard web servers. So basically with that, you take HTML files or PHP files, something like that. You put those files into the web server, basically into a folder structure, and then when a user goes into that web server, it just pulls the file and delivers that to the end user. So if you need a CSS file, a style sheet file, or you need an image file, basically all the files are just stored within that structure and you're just able to link to those. The important thing to understand in the Bottle world is all of these web pages are going to be dynamically created using Bottle and these templates. So it doesn't actually have kind of like file storage inherently built into it. File storage is kind of like something else. And the idea is that every piece of functionality is also a vulnerability. Storing files on your web server that are accessible by your visitors is actually a vulnerability to your web server. So from an architectural standpoint, kind of the idea is that the static files should be somewhere else, in a storage bucket on AWS, basically on an entirely different file server, so that the Bottle server and the file server should theoretically be separated. You can create static files, basically in Bottle on the exact same server using a static file function that we'll talk about later. Then you have Gunicorn. So what Gunicorn is it's a web server for serving web app framework web apps using Python. So Python has a built-in web server, but it's something called single-threaded. Basically what that means is it can only handle one request at a time. So if you have multiple users coming to your web app, and for some reason one of the users' requests gets slowed down, that means every visitor is going to get slowed down. It can only deal with one thing at once. Then you have what are called multi-threaded Python web servers, Gunicorn Gunicorn is one of those. And basically what happens with that is Gunicorn, you can say how many workers you want when you're delivering this particular web app. And so with that, that allows for multiple threads. Basically, one user's request is being done at the same time another user's request is being done at the same time another user's request. So even if one request gets slowed down or frozen, that's not going to slow down everybody. Now with Bottle, you can use different Python web servers, but Gunicorn is kind of the standard. So when we actually put this out into a production environment, we're going to use Gunicorn. When I show you running a script from VS Code, that is using the built-in Python web server. So that's not using Gunicorn. When we go to deploy it, we'll use Gunicorn. I'll show you that in other classes. Then what's going to happen is you're going to have Nginx. And so Nginx is going to be between Gunicorn and your Bottle web app. And this is what's called a reverse proxy server. So Nginx is basically, it's a web server, a web page server if you've used it for other projects. But one of the things that it can do is be what's called a reverse proxy server. What this means is when visitors come in to your web app, they're going to hit Nginx first. Nginx is going to deal with caching, it's going to deal with load balancing, a whole bunch of different issues it's very good at. And so basically, your user is going to come into Nginx. Nginx is going to figure out what to do with your user. It's then going to pass it to Gunicorn, which then passes it to Bottle, and then everything runs in Python, and the response comes back through. So now let's try to diagram this out so it makes a little bit more sense to you, right? So let's start. We're going to have the internet cloud here, and we're going to have the user that is connecting to the internet cloud, right? They are going to want to go to your web app. You know, they want to go to crappyapp.com. where your app is, right? And so basically this is connected to DigitalOcean, let's say, and you're going to have an IP address of 204.66.22.1, right? So your user is going to want to go to crappyapp.com, so it's going to go to the DNS server. So the DNS server is going to say the IP address for crappyapp.com is 204.66.22.1, and so then this is going to get routed to your Nginx server, right? So this is going to be up on DigitalOcean or something like that, Azure, whatever, right? So it's going to be the IP address and it's going to be coming in there. Within Nginx, you're going to have some configurations, and basically you'll have a configuration for crappyapp.com. Right? And so basically with crappyapp.com, what it's going to say is it's going to say go to Gunicorn. Right? And so under this, you're going to have Gunicorn. Gunicorn is going to be running your Bottle app at port 8080. So at 127.0.0.1:8080, Gunicorn is going to be delivering your web app. So when the user comes in to this IP address, they're going to hit Nginx, they're going to ask for crappyapp.com. Nginx is then going to route them to 127.0.0.1:8080, which is the Gunicorn web server. Under this then is basically going to be your Bottle framework, right? So Bottle, again, for the routing, all of those purposes. And then with Bottle, again, you're going to have a static folder somewhere. So this may be on AWS, that type of thing, and basically this is going to be where the files are located. Again, when I talk about files, I'm not just talking about images or videos or that type of thing. I'm also talking about things like CSS style sheets, JavaScript files, any kind of files like that. They will be in a static folder. There will also be a templates folder. That is called views, actually, right? And basically in the templates folder, that is where, basically these templates are for the different web pages, so that Bottle can dynamically create web pages using something called a template language. Now then under this, right, is then going to be Python. Right, and Python is basically going to do all the processing, right? So if you need to communicate with a REST API, that is going to be done with Python. If you need to communicate with a SQL database, that is going to be done with Python. If you need to communicate directly with an OS or you need to read from CSV files or anything like that, that is going to be done with Python. So that is where all of that kind of processing happens, right? So basically you have the user, they get routed through Nginx, they get routed through Gunicorn, they come through Bottle. Bottle then basically makes a request of the information that the user wants. Python then sends that up through Gunicorn Nginx to the user, and that is the idea of how the architecture of this system works. Now, in general, with Nginx, Gunicorn, Bottle, and all this, this is going to be on one box, right? So again, within DigitalOcean, this will be in a VPS, or if you build it, using one of your own computers, this will be on your own server. So basically, you'll have something like a Linux operating system. So you have the Linux operating system, you'll have Python installed, you'll have Bottle installed, you have Gunicorn installed, you'll have Nginx installed, and then all of this will be configured so that this stack works properly. So this is going to be what it looks like when you actually deploy this into the real world. When we're doing the projects, on the other hand, we're just going to hit the run button, and we're not going to worry about this when we're building small projects. We're not going to be worried about this when we're building small projects. We're just going to be dealing with this component. This is going to be what's required when you actually go to deploy this. So I hope that makes sense for you, but this is the basic idea of what the architecture is going to look like when you go to deploy a web app that's been created with the Bottle framework. Again, a lot of the stuff that I talked about here, you're not going to need for a lot of the projects that we're going to do, but I don't know, 8 or 9 classes from now, when you're actually to the point where you're going to deploy this up to something like DigitalOcean, you are going to have to think about this kind of stuff. And again, that's where the prerequisites, when we start talking about IP addresses and port 8080, you do have to have a basic understanding of how that works. Again, when we start talking about templates and we need to start talking about static files, you're going to have a basic idea of how that kind of thing is going to work. But this will give the idea of what you're working towards, so that as we talk about these different subjects, you will start to be able to slot that in and understand where that fits in for when you're building your project. So this is what the architecture looks like, and this is what the tech stack for a Bottle web app is going to look like. And so now we actually get to dive in and start building some little web apps using Bottle.